Fortifications have historically posed immense challenges to attacking armies. Over the centuries, they often necessitated prolonged and costly sieges, draining resources, inflicting heavy casualties, and consuming valuable time. Even with advances in military technology, by the early 20th century, fortresses remained formidable obstacles. This began to change during the early stages of the First World War, when the German military introduced super heavy siege artillery, most notably the massive 42-centimeter howitzer, famously nicknamed Big Bertha. This weapon demonstrated that even the strongest fortifications could be breached, signaling that fortifications were no longer as invincible as they once seemed. By the time the Second World War loomed on the horizon, the Germans had not forgotten the effectiveness of large-caliber siege weapons. In 1935, they initiated the development of a new generation of super-heavy mortars, tailored specifically for cracking heavily fortified regions like the French Maginot Line. The result was the Karl-Gerät series, massive self-propelled mortars including the 60-centimeter Karl-Gerät 040 and the slightly smaller 54-centimeter Karl-Gerät 041. Only 7 of these colossal machines would be built, and they were among the largest self-propelled artillery pieces ever created, designed to deliver crushing blows to concrete bunkers and enemy morale alike. With the rise of Nazism and the rearmament of Germany, the Wehrmacht launched an ambitious campaign of military expansion, investing heavily in new technologies and advanced weaponry. Both military planners and the Nazi leadership anticipated a future confrontation with France, and they were keenly aware of the formidable obstacle that stood in their way, the Maginot Line. Widely regarded as the most sophisticated and heavily fortified stronghold of its time, the Maginot Line featured deep concrete bunkers, steel gun emplacements, and extensive underground infrastructure. Against such robust fortifications, even the heaviest divisional artillery was expected to be largely ineffective. By 1935, the German army concluded that only super heavy artillery or mortars could hope to breach these defenses. Feeling confident in its industrial capabilities, the army commissioned Rheinmetall to develop a weapon specifically for this task. The initial concept called for an 80-centimeter muzzle-loading mortar with a limited range of just 2 kilometers, intended to be deployed from a static position. Due to its enormous size, the weapon would need to be disassembled into smaller components, transported to the front, and dug into position before being reassembled. Although undeniably destructive, the mortar's range and the lengthy assembly process were seen as major drawbacks. Due to the mortar's massive size and the extended time required for assembly, the crew would be left unacceptably exposed during setup. To address these concerns, the army stipulated 2 critical improvements. The mortar must have a minimum range of 3 kilometers and a maximum assembly time of 6 hours. These requirements would set the design parameters for what would eventually evolve into one of the most iconic siege weapons of the Second World War, the Karl-Gerät. In early 1937, Rheinmetall proposed reducing the mortar's caliber from 80 cm to 60 cm, which brought the overall weight down to approximately 55 tons. However, despite the reduction in size, the weapon still required disassembly into multiple components for transport, with each part needing a separate towing vehicle. This setup, while theoretically mobile, remained too cumbersome, and the assembly alone would still exceed the army's 6-hour limit. To overcome this logistical hurdle, Rheinmetall proposed a far more efficient and innovative solution, mounting the mortar onto a fully tracked, self-propelled chassis. This approach offered numerous operational advantages. Most notably, the mortar could now be readied for firing in under 30 minutes, drastically improving responsiveness on the battlefield. It also eliminated the need for a convoy of support and towing vehicles, as a weapon no longer required disassembly for transport. If necessary, however, the chassis could still be separated into transportable modules. Additionally, the entire vehicle could be lowered to the ground before firing, providing a more stable platform without the need to excavate a firing pit to place a mortar inside as originally intended. A hydraulic recoil absorption system was also introduced, which significantly dampened the immense recoil forces generated by the mortar's massive projectiles. By October 1937, Rheinmetall made additional key modifications to the prototype. The muzzle loading system was abandoned, and the driver's compartment was relocated to the rear of the self-propelled chassis, meaning the entire chassis would now be driven in reverse relative to the orientation of the mortar. Finally, ballistic improvements extended the maximum firing range to 4 kilometers. In 1938, Rheinmetall received official approval to construct the first prototype of the super heavy mortar. This decision was largely driven by the persistent advocacy of General Karl-Heinrich Emil Becker, the head of the Army's Ordnance Department and a key figure in German artillery development. Alongside the prototype, an initial production run of 6 additional vehicles was authorized. However, given the weapon's highly specialized role and considerable cost, Rheinmetall was informed that no further orders would follow beyond the 7 units. One of the primary early concerns was the vehicle's ground pressure and mobility, as the immense weight of the system posed a risk of becoming bogged down. To address this, a small remote-controlled scale model was built and tested. The result was encouraging, and the project was allowed to move forward. Field testing of the self-propelled chassis began in May 1940. Although the main mortar was not yet installed at this stage, instead, ballast was used to simulate its weight during these tests. The first fully completed Karl-Gerät, including the 60 cm mortar, was formally presented to the German Army on the 2nd of July 1940. Beginning in November 1940, this vehicle received the official designation Gerät 040. In July 1942, the system was renamed Karl-Gerät, in honor of General Karl Becker, who had committed suicide in April 1940, likely due to political pressure and health issues. Despite his passing, the German army chose to memorialize his contributions by naming the weapon after him. Each of the vehicles also receives a specific Ausführung designation, labeled with Arabic numerals. In addition, crews gave their vehicle nicknames inspired by mythological figures or Norse gods. The later variant, equipped with a slightly smaller 54 cm mortar, was designated Karl-Gerät 041. 3 of the 7 produced vehicles would be modernized to this version. Despite its immense and imposing size, the Karl's box-shaped chassis had a relatively simple design with little complexity inside. The lowering mechanism was positioned at the front of the vehicle. Most of the central section was actually empty, serving as a base for the mortar and its carriage. To provide more workspace, folding platforms were installed along the sides. The rear of the vehicle housed the engine and transmission. On the right side of the engine bay, a small indentation accommodated the driver's seat and controls. Karl-Gerät mortars were powered by 2 different types of engine. The first 4 vehicles were fitted with Maybach MB503A gasoline engines, while the last 3 received MB507C diesel engines. In 1944, at least one of the gasoline-powered units was retrofitted with a diesel engine to improve performance and fuel logistics. Both engine types delivered 580 horsepower at 1,850 rpm, which was barely sufficient for the vehicle's enormous combat weight of 124 tons. As a result, mobility was severely limited. The gasoline-powered models could manage a maximum road speed of just 10 km per hour, while the diesel-powered versions were even slower, topping out at 6 km per hour. The fuel tank held 1,200 liters, offering a maximum range of 42 km for gasoline engines and 60 km for the diesel-powered variants. Despite the vehicle's weight and limited speed, field reports indicate that the Karl-Gerät performed surprisingly well off-road. The first 2 Karl-Gerät vehicles were equipped with a suspension system consisting of 8 large rubber-rimmed road wheels per side, paired with a rear-mounted drive sprocket, front idler, and 8 return rollers. However, operational feedback and weight concerns prompted a redesign for later units, which were fitted with an upgraded suspension system, featuring 11 all-steel road wheels per side. While the idler and drive sprocket positions remained unchanged, the number of return rollers was reduced to 6. Eventually, the first 2 vehicles were retrofitted with this improved suspension to standardize the fleet. Using engine-powered hydraulics, the vehicle could be lowered to the ground in just 15 seconds, stabilizing the chassis for firing. Raising it back up for movement took an equal amount of time. The centerpiece of the Karl-Gerät was its massive 60 cm self-loading mortar, housed in a reinforced box-like cradle. The barrel was relatively short, measuring just 5.07 meters, and was fitted with a sliding breech block for loading. The enormous recoil generated by each shot was absorbed not only by the main chassis, but also by a secondary recoil mechanism built into the mortar's cradle. The mortar's elevation ranged from 0 degree to 70 degree, though it was only operable in a firing arc between 55 degree and 70 degree due to the weapon's ballistic profile. Traverse was extremely limited, with only 4 degrees of movement to either side, meaning the entire vehicle had to be repositioned to engage new targets outside this narrow firing window. The first shell developed for the Karl-Gerät was a massive high-explosive projectile containing 600 kilograms of explosives. However, this round never entered mass production. Instead, the first shell to see operational use was the schwere Betongranate. This formidable round measured 2.51 meters in length, weighed 2.17 tons, and carried an explosive charge of 280 kilograms. Depending on the number of propellant charges loaded, it could achieve a maximum range of 4.32 kilometers. Thanks to its enormous mass and kinetic energy, it was capable of penetrating up to 2.5 meters of reinforced concrete before detonation, making it ideal for crushing bunkers and hardened positions. Despite its destructive potential, the relatively short range of the schwere Betongranate was seen as a significant drawback. To address this, German engineers introduced a lighter variant in 1942, the leichte Betongranate. This version weighed 1.7 tons and carried a 220 kg of explosive charge. The reduced weight allowed for additional propellant charges, which in turn increased the muzzle velocity and extended the maximum firing range to 6.64 kilometers. Due to the enormous weight of the ammunition, manual loading was not feasible. Instead, the Karl-Gerät relied on an electrically powered rammer and a dedicated loading platform to handle its shell. After each shot, the mortar had to be returned to a 0 degree elevation to reload. Even under optimal condition and with a highly trained crew, the rate of fire was limited to 1 round every 10 minutes. Before each shot, a crew member had to inspect the barrel for cracks or any damage to the rifling grooves. While the 60 cm mortar delivered unparalleled firepower, its limited range remained a persistent drawback. Even Adolf Hitler personally raised concern over this and demanded a new mortar with improved range. This led to the development of a 54 cm caliber version, which could be mounted on the same chassis. Work began in February 1941, but the project encountered numerous mechanical issues and delays. Consequently, the 354 cm equipped vehicles were not delivered until June 1944. Thanks to a higher muzzle velocity, the new gun increased the maximum firing range to 10 kilometers. The original 60 cm mortar version required a crew of 21 men, 1 commander, 18 gunners, a driver, and an assistant driver. The 54 cm variant required a slightly smaller crew of 18. To transport and load the massive rounds, the Germans converted at least 13 Panzer IV tanks into specialized ammunition supply vehicles. These vehicles were outfitted with storage bins for 4 shells and fitted with electrically powered cranes to lift and position the rounds. Typically, 2 such vehicles were assigned to each Karl-Gerät. Ironically, the very objective for which the Karl-Gerät was designed, the destruction of heavily fortified positions, was achieved without their direct involvement. As France fell in 1940 before the mortars were operational. Nevertheless, development and production continued, and the vehicles were eventually integrated into Germany's Eastern Front campaign. In April 1941, the 833rd Heavy Artillery Battalion was formed, comprising 2 batteries, each equipped with 2 Karl-Gerät vehicles. As part of the preparation for Operation Barbarossa, these were assigned specific targets along the Soviet frontier. On 23rd of June in 1941, the first battery was directed to bombard Soviet defensive positions at Wielki Dział in Poland. However, only 1 Karl mortar managed to fire, and it launched just 4 rounds before mechanical problems rendered it inoperable. The second vehicle never even reached its firing position due to a broken track. By the end of the day, Both were declared non-operational and sent back for Germany for repairs. Meanwhile, the second battery was assigned to bombard Brest-Litovsk fortress, which unlike the Maginot Line, consisted of older 19th century brick and earthwork fortifications. The bombardment began on the 22nd of June 1941, and in contrast to the first battery's mechanical troubles, the second battery's deployment was considered a notable success. No significant issues were reported with either the chassis or the mortar mechanisms, and the precision of the Karl-Gerät impressed observers as its immense round landed in tight clusters. Though Brest-Litovsk lacked modern reinforced concrete bunkers, thick masonry structures were easily obliterated. A 2-meter thick brick wall was destroyed with ease, a feat that even Germany's heavy siege guns had previously struggled with. A direct hit from a 60-centimeter round produced a crater 10 meters deep and 30 meters wide, underscoring the sheer destructive power of the weapon. In early 1942, the German military launched an extensive operation to deploy its heaviest artillery against the heavily fortified Soviet defenses surrounding Sevastopol, a key Black Sea port. In 1941, General Erich von Manstein failed to capture the city due to insufficient manpower and firepower. Determined to succeed in the second attempt, the Germans brought forward their most devastating siege weapons, including the 80-centimeter Dora railway gun and 3 Karl-Gerät self-propelled mortars, which arrived at the front in late May 1942. Their primary objectives were Fort No. 30 and Fort No. 39. Fort No. 30 was especially formidable, armed with 2 twin 30.5-centimeter guns housed in massive armored turrets protected by 20 to 30 centimeter of steel plating. The Karl mortars were intensively employed in the bombardment. While some fortifications resisted even the 60-centimeter rounds, the Karl-Gerät frequently inflicted significant structural damage. One of Fort No. 30's armored turret was completely destroyed by a direct hit, and large sections of bastion's thick sloped walls, up to 30 meters wide, were also obliterated. An unusual incident involved a 60-centimeter round ricocheting off Fort No. 30 and landing several hundred meters away. After a prolonged search, Soviet troops recovered the shell and transported it to Moscow for analysis. Following the intense fighting, Sevastopol would fall, and the 3 Karl mortars were withdrawn in mid-July 1942 for recuperation and maintenance. Later that month, a new unit designated the 628th Battery was formed. Its intended mission was to assist in the planned assault on Leningrad, but the operation was never carried out, and the Karl-Gerät would never fire upon the city. The interrogation of Soviet defenders captured in Sevastopol later revealed that ordinary heavy artillery and aerial bombing had limited effect on their morale. In contrast, the shockwaves from the Karl-Gerät's enormous shell had a deep psychological impact, demoralizing those within the bunkers. Their next notable deployment came in August 1944, during the Warsaw Uprising. The Karl mortars were brought in to target Polish resistance fighters entrenched within the city. However, despite their massive caliber, they did not use high explosive shells, which limited their effectiveness. Often, the massive rounds punched straight through the building without exploding, causing significant structural damage but not total destruction. In some instances, the rounds failed to detonate altogether and had to be disarmed. Unexploded shells remained scattered around Warsaw for decades, with the last known being discovered as late as 2007. The mortars were next considered for the bombardment of Paris, but the plan never materialized. Instead, in September 1944, one battery received orders to relocate to Budapest, though it was evacuated by October 19th. By mid-November 1944, all Karl vehicles had returned to Germany. The final combat use of a 54-centimeter armed Karl-Gerät took place in the west, in a desperate attempt to destroy the Ludendorff Bridge at Remagen, which had been captured by Allied forces. This effort ultimately failed. By the war's end, one Karl vehicle was destroyed by its own crew to prevent capture, while the others were seized by the advancing Allies and Soviet forces. This concludes our video on the Karl-Gerät, Germany's massive self-propelled siege mortars. While undeniably impressive from an engineering standpoint, they raise a lingering question. Did their immense firepower truly justify the enormous resources, manpower, and logistical effort required to deploy them? Let us know what you think in the comment section below. If you haven't done so already, we invite you to subscribe to stay updated on future content. If you'd like to contribute further, consider supporting us on Patreon or PayPal. We want to especially thank our medium and heavy tank Patreon supporters: Berit Gunther, Dan Fitzpatrick, Dave Schuffert, Leslie Hookover, Michael Herman, Nick H, Owen M, R. Rob, Sopwith21, and Wolf Hun. Your generous contribution help fund our research, illustrations, and video production. Until next time, keep us in your sights.